Hey, it's KR King of D&D Homebrew, talking today about why you don't want to use the prototype big bad villain in a homebrewed sandbox campaign. There's a number of reasons I'm going to cover in this video today, and the first is from that very term I used, sandbox. If you have a sandbox campaign, that means the players can go wherever they want. You know, there are things that interest them. You're putting out different possible story hooks and plot hooks or whatever you want to call them, to lure them to some area, but you're staying back and you're letting them choose where they go. And so the very notion of this big bad villain that's out there that has to be confronted, that continues to, leave clues and signs and whatnot, it leads to potential for a railroad. And that railroad is both from you, the GM, but also from the players. So for you as the GM, it's obvious. You're saying, look at what this person is doing. Their operatives are doing things. They're always in the background. The players realize, okay, we have to confront this person. Perhaps they're, threatening a global catastrophe or something, or they're just messing with the area that the players all grew up in, the kingdom. It's an opposing kingdom. Perhaps it's a lich that is doing all sorts of horrific things. And the players know, okay, eventually we're going to have to go after this lich. We all know that, right? Well, is that what you really want? Don't you want the players to decide that on their own and make the decision to go after some powerful figure? And that's the second form of the railroading. The players, when they see this happening, feel obliged. Well, I guess we got to do that. It's like if you play in a supposed sandbox, but there's only one thing to do. Or there's a board in the town square, and you did this and you did that. Well, there's one left. I guess we got to go do that. That's railroading. And so when there's a big villain like this, the players think, well, I guess we got to start on this. We got to find out about this person. How powerful are they? Where can we start? What can we do? Well, that's not the idea of a sandbox. And this relates to my second reason, which is there's a difference between a published adventure, adventure path, a module, whatever you want, and this sandbox concept. And the classic, big bad villain railroad module is the Curse of Strahd. Now, I haven't played this in a long, long time, so maybe it's changed in the more recent edition, so my apologies. But what I always felt like when I looked at that and played in it was, this is the ultimate railroad. We're stuck in Barovia, and we have to confront Strahd. We have to defeat him, maybe get him to, let us go or something. I don't see how that can happen, but... and I know there's people, I have read a little on theories of other things you can do, but really that's what you're going to do? No, that's what the whole thing is about. So to me, that's the adventure path flaw in that once I figure out, and I've played in a number of them, and there's usually some, a series of encounters and situations that go up as you go up in level, but you're going to come to, the villain, the secret to this place, whatever. And it just becomes an exercise in running to me, not in exploring a world, not in seeing where my character evolves and takes part in that world, builds alliances, gets interests. If you go up levels, get strongholds, or the players buy things, in a town or whatever, and then deal with the threats that come from their activities. And when we talk about what a sandbox homebrewed campaign isn't, one of the big ones is not a novel or a story or a film. It's different. That's coming out of you and the player's activity. So you look at, say, Lord of the Rings, the basic text of D&D, Sauron is the ultimate big bad villain. And all three books are about defeating Sauron. That's the goal. And all sorts of different characters take on different roles in that. But it just goes like this because Tolkien was writing this as a series of novels. Well, that's not how in my mind, a sandbox fantasy RPG game goes. We're developing this as we play. We have no idea how it's going to end. And I will use as an example of this, I played at GaryCon. I mentioned this in our podcast. I do Monsters and Treasure with Daniel Norton of Bandits Keep. I'm at GaryCon and I played the old Strategy and Tactics Simulation Publications Incorporated, SPI, their version of The War of the Rings, a board game. And Daniel came by and watched me play. And the idea is the forces of Sauron. One player plays Sauron, one player plays the Fellowship of the Ring, and the other player, in a three-man person game, it's Saruman. Usually you play two, but for the tournament the convention we did three. So we went around, and the person that was playing the Fellowship did not know the rules very well. This is from 1977. I had not played it since the late 70s, early 80s, but I had played it. So they had the ring bearer wandering around sort of unguarded, and Saruman, first he killed Frodo, took the ring. Then Aragorn and Boromir took it back. I was Sauron, I had my forces, but Aragorn got on Shadowfax and rode like crazy to Mount Doom. My last-ditch effort was to stop him at Minas Tirith or Mogul, I can't remember, one of those gates, and I sent a Balrog after him, and my forces won. So Sauron got the ring, and that's it. Now, why did that happen? Because it's a game. Because it's not a novel. So once you establish that this is a game, you don't know what's going to happen. And if you have a game where the Fellowship just wins every time, well, that's not a game, right? Well, D&D is a game. So the players' activities are going to determine what happens in this game. So it's really important that if you have a big bad villain character that everything is focused on, like the Strahd sort of thing, it's a different kind of game. It's not the game that we're going for in a sandbox. And this leads to our third thing is you want the events of your world to be driven at least half, maybe even more, by the activities of the players. They're going to create opponents. Their activities are going to make people mad at them, or they're going to run into people that they decide that's the guy we want to get. Not some villain that you've created over here and you've laid all these clues. They're mad about something that happened to them. They'll go after that person. It happens every time in a sandbox. They decide we're going to go after this person, or they do something to some person, NPC or whatever that I've set up in my world where it's reasonable for me to go, they're out to get you. They are mad. Now you have the nemesis. And the nemesis is way better when it comes from the player's activities. So then what you're doing is you're setting up these various sort of unformed power bases or whatever. And some of them might be, mind flayers, let's say, or, I guess you could have a lich, but you could have a giant community, let's say. And if you're playing giants, these are nasty giants or whatever. And the players do something to infringe on their territory. And the giants then do something to mess with the players. Maybe some village near where they are, they smash it, whatever, and they say, this is for what these guys did to us or something. Whoever it is, whether it's orcs or hobgoblins, any kind of sentient creatures that can interact with the players in a way that they're responding to them and they're making the decision. Things are changing in your world. The players are influencing the world and creating oppositional forces. They are, as I always say, they're the protagonists of the world, but they're also the antagonists. Because we're all watching this game as viewers, both the players and the GM, and seeing where their actions will take them. And that's where you develop your villains. But it doesn't have to be a super villain. This is the other thing. The economy of scale here. When you have, second or third level player characters, you're probably going to balance to some extent the encounters they get, unless they want to mess with someone higher level. But it isn't going to be some super powerful figure that we associate with the classic big bad villain. Maybe someone a little bit higher than them. So you're not thinking big bad, you're thinking what is the level of the players? What is the scope of their activities? And where can I find oppositional forces that are at the same level or slightly above? So instead of villains, what I tend to say, my defining term is oppositional forces. This could be an individual, this could be a group. And this oppositional force arises from the player's activities. And what you want is as the players advance and as the players evolve in terms of their understanding of the world, so do these oppositional forces. So do these individuals or groups or whatever that are also rising up potentially in power and, watching what the players do and reacting to what they do. And they are evolving, and the most interesting way they can evolve is if you have an oppositional force that the players, for whatever reason, I had this figure Vesper in my world, and she ran this gambling hall and she was doing smuggling, and the players at first really hated her and, messed with her and stuff. And then at some point they got into a situation where they had to ally against a larger force. And they did this very hesitantly, as did Vesper. But they did this. And in the end, they became allies, grudging allies, because she still was a criminal overlord. But they realized they had shared interests, and they had more to gain by being allies than they did as oppositional forces. So when you have villains that evolve like the players do, it's way more interesting than just having, here's the bad guy, or the person, and you're just going to have to follow this path until you get to them, and then we'll have a big battle, and that'll be the end of the campaign. It's more interesting to have open-ended, right? An open-ended resolve. I don't know what's going to happen in this campaign. We'll just play until things change, or we get tired, we want to do something else. Not necessarily this climactic event. And by doing that, you can allow these oppositional forces to evolve and grow as the players do. And so when you're creating these oppositional forces to your players' activities, these individuals, usually sentient humanoids or monsters or other NPCs, when you're developing them, think about what they want. So let's start with big time, a lich, right? Because I've had liches in my world all since when they appeared in the monster manual. But players rarely run into them because usually first of all, they're very powerful when the players are low level. I put them in remote places. They have all sorts of time to create all sorts of permanent spell traps and things. And I mean, they're very deadly. Why? What motivates a lich is to live forever. I mean, that's why they use this dark magic. They refuse to die. And so what are the activities of that? One of them is not to have groups of potentially powerful humanoids coming after them all the time. Maybe the humanoids have something they want, something that will allow them to not merely be alive as this sort of undead creation, but live again, to actually breathe and eat and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. It's like the vampire that all they want to do is just be alive for a week and they'll accept death because the undeath is so horrific. But that's the lich wants to stay alive, and that may mean protecting itself and continuing its experiments for whatever reason it does. I used to also say perhaps over the centuries they become insane, right? So they don't even know what they want. But they don't necessarily want to mess with the players. Another classic example, you have mind flayers. Mind flayers with an elder brain and, their arcane purposes in the old days used to be totally mysterious. They were so alien and foreign. But their purposes may not be to necessarily mess with the players. Now, again, both of these examples are creatures that are inherently hostile to life and to sentient. The mind flayers are legendarily egomaniacs that anything other than themselves is worthless and just should be slaves or wiped out. So it's going to be hard to have some kind of alliance situation or whatever. But you want to think about what it is that they want and how they're going to go about getting it, and that may or may not intersect with the player's interests. You can give clues. You can have them, do some stuff that the players notice. But if the players decide to ignore that, just have these, this kind of larger scale villain or a potential oppositional force, just let it be doing its own thing. Let it be operating in its own sphere. And it can just be a general abstract thing. You don't be tracking. I've got 38 things I'm tracking all the time. No, you don't necessarily do that. But I would say I would put a lich out in some lonely tower, and somehow the players might find out there's something mysterious. There's some dark force in this tower, like when Sauron reappears. So as I say, when you create these oppositional forces, you want to think about where the players are in their level and sphere of influence and how they hear about this. And then decide what happens if and when the players interact with this. And then they can evolve into larger ones, or you can have some larger ones out, when their sphere of influence and renown and everything start to grow. And you can build those up. But you're always remembering that there are many forces in the world. There are many things going on all the time. It's not necessarily just one thing. It can become that. It can become, if you've got this idea of this artifact, and then through the either actions of the players, that's the best, but reactions to them, a powerful force gets a hold of this and starts to dominate, then there may be a race to defeat this and save the world, but it's evolved out of the players' activities. And I want to take this opportunity to thank all my Patreon supporters. I really appreciate it. And for my Night supporters, this week's PDF is going to be on some mid-range oppositional, opponents because I love to do that. I love creating these, that I'm going to show you some ideas on how you can have these probably presented to the players, what their goals might be, and how they might react to the players' actions, as they move through the world, and how they can possibly evolve into a more major level oppositional force or potentially ally with the players. And then for my Duke supporters, of course, they always get that PDF, but they're also going to get an additional video where I really go into the sort of forces that the players can be in opposition to in a campaign, more so than just individuals, but what is happening in your world? What are the, what's the Zeitgeist, as they used to say, about, where things are, the future, what are the feelings about the future, about the past, about the sort of, advances that might be being made with discoveries of magic items or the appearance of new gods or, some mysterious things that are happening. These are things that the players can start to discover, learn, things about the past that no one knew, reasons for things that are best kept hidden. And these are the kind of things then that other sentient creatures might also become interested in. And that becomes either a race for these kind of things or different ways that they want to use this information or access or understand what's happening in the world. And I think when you think about this in a more sophisticated way, it'll make your world much more interesting for your players to discover. And hopefully you like what you've seen on my channel. If you did, please subscribe. I always love more. I'd love to have comments on your thoughts on big bad villains. Maybe you love them. Maybe you think they don't have any railroading problem at all. But most importantly, my friends, keep playing an RPG game, whichever one you choose. Tell somebody else about it.